You leave the conversation and something feels off in your body. Your hands tremble slightly. Your jaw is tight. Your head feels heavy, as if you've been carrying weight that isn't yours. Nothing dramatic happened. No one raised their voice. No insults were thrown. And yet you feel strangely empty, like your energy leaked out while you were trying to stay calm. You replay the exchange in your mind, searching for the exact moment it shifted. They said, "I was just joking." They smiled and added, "You're too sensitive." Maybe they ended with, "I only say this because I care." On the surface, it sounds harmless, supportive even. But your body reacts as if it just survived something. This pattern shows up everywhere. At work, with a coworker who cuts you down politely, then watches you scramble to explain. At home, with a partner who reframes every concern until you're the problem. With family members who wrap pressure in warmth and call it love. You stay respectful. You choose your words carefully. You try to clarify your intentions, your tone, your meaning. And while you are focused on being reasonable, they are completely relaxed. Sometimes they even seem amused. You explain more, they say less. You feel smaller, they feel steadier. That imbalance is the clue most people miss. This isn't about poor communication or emotional misunderstanding. If it were, effort would fix it. But effort only makes it worse. The more you try to be understood, the more drained you become. The more patient you are, the more control slips away. This is why intelligent, self-aware people often struggle the most in these interactions. You assume good faith. You assume shared rules. You assume empathy is enough. It isn't. What you're experiencing isn't weakness, it's exposure. You're stepping into a dynamic designed to leave you questioning yourself while the other person walks away intact. Once you recognize this pattern, the exhaustion stops feeling random. It stops feeling like a personal failure. It starts to look like a system you've been pulled into without consent. And that realization is powerful, because systems can be exited. If you feel drained after every interaction, the problem is not your sensitivity. It's the game you're being pulled into. 5 centuries ago, Niccolò Machiavelli described human behavior in a way that still unsettles people today. Not because it was cruel, but because it refused to lie. He wasn't interested in how people should act when everyone is fair and well-intentioned. He focused on how people actually act when power, insecurity, and self-interest quietly shape their decisions. That lens matters here. Because when you deal with a toxic person, you're not dealing with a bad mood, a rough week, or emotional immaturity that just needs patience. You're dealing with a repeatable pattern, a mechanism that runs the same script regardless of who stands in front of it. Toxic behavior isn't random. It's consistent. It presses, provokes, destabilizes, then watches how you respond. If you frame that behavior as emotional or misunderstood, you stay vulnerable. Machiavelli warned against this mistake long before modern psychology existed. He understood that most people lose not because they lack morals, but because they misread the situation they're in. This video does not exist to heal toxic people, diagnose them, or help you explain your feelings more clearly. It won't teach you softer language or better phrasing. Those tools assume mutual respect, and that assumption is what keeps you trapped. Instead, this video gives you a different operating system, one that helps you see the mechanism instead of personalizing the damage, one that helps you stop being manipulated without becoming aggressive, one that protects your energy so you're no longer dragged into emotional games you never agreed to play. When you shift from asking, "Why are they like this?" to seeing, "This is how this system functions," something clicks. The confusion lifts. The guilt fades. And for the first time, you can choose how close you stand to it. That is the Machiavellian frame. Not heartlessness, not cynicism, precision. This video is not about being nice, it's about staying intact. The most fatal mistake you make with toxic people is believing you're in a shared reality. You assume the conversation has the same goal for both sides. You think if you explain clearly enough, they'll finally understand. You think if you soften your tone, show patience, or stay kind, the tension will dissolve. That belief feels mature, it feels emotionally intelligent, and it quietly keeps you trapped. Because while you think the purpose is understanding, their purpose is control. You speak to resolve. They speak to test. You share context. They listen for leverage. Every explanation you give becomes a tool they can repurpose later. Every emotional reaction becomes proof that they still have access to you. This is why the pattern feels so draining. You can argue for an hour, walking through facts, intentions, timelines, even apologizing for things that aren't yours to carry. Your energy steadily drops. Your voice gets flatter. Your body feels heavy. Meanwhile, they remain oddly calm. Sometimes they even look refreshed. When it's over, you replay every sentence in your head, wondering where you went wrong. They move on as if nothing happened. Not because they didn't hear you, but because the outcome already favored them. Your exhaustion was the objective. This is where empathetic, thoughtful people get stuck. You assume the other person values clarity the way you do. You assume honesty invites honesty. With toxic people, it doesn't. Honesty invites exploitation. The more you try to explain yourself, the more material you give them. The more you react emotionally, the more influence they gain. Power in these interactions doesn't come from being right. It comes from controlling who loses their balance. And it's rarely the toxic person. They aren't looking for resolution. They're looking for proof that they can still disrupt you. That's why being gentler never works. That's why doubling down on communication only deepens the drain. The moment you stop framing this as a misunderstanding and start seeing it as a game, the confusion begins to clear. Games reward certain behaviors and punish others. In this one, the rules are brutal but simple. The person who reacts loses ground. The person who stays centered keeps it. You think you're communicating. They think they're harvesting. The first principle works because it removes the very thing toxic people depend on: reaction, emotion, explanation. Without those, their tactics have nothing to attach to. Toxic people don't argue to reach truth. They provoke to trigger movement inside you. A change in your face, a shift in your tone, a need to correct the record. That movement is how they locate power. When you become still, the system fails. Becoming the void does not mean disappearing or acting passive. It means refusing to provide emotional friction. Strategic silence is not emptiness, it is control. Most people panic at silence because they were trained to believe response equals strength. In reality, response often equals exposure. The void gives them nothing to read, no cues, no hooks, no leverage. Imagine how often a small remark pulls you in, a sideways comment, a subtle jab framed as humor. Your instinct is to defend yourself, to clarify what you meant, to protect your image in the room. That instinct is exactly what keeps the loop alive. When you resist it, the dynamic changes immediately. Picture a meeting. A coworker smirks and says, "I guess some people have more free time than others." The old response would be justification. Hours worked, late nights, evidence. That makes you look defensive, even when you're right. The Machiavellian response is simple. You pause, You meet their eyes without tension. You say, "Interesting perspective." Then you turn back to your presentation and continue. No explanation, no correction, no edge. That moment quietly rewrites the hierarchy. You didn't attack. You didn't submit. You denied them fuel. Their comment lands and dies where it fell. The room notices. More importantly, they notice. Often, this is when they escalate. Another comment, a louder tone, a repeat of the jab. This is not a setback. It's a signal that their usual controls stopped working. Stay flat. Stay slow. Let the discomfort belong to them. Becoming the void means you stop volunteering your inner state. You remain polite, present, and functional. But you are no longer transparent. No emotional essays, no visible wounds, no urgency to be understood. Over time, something predictable happens. They lose interest. Not because they changed, but because the exchange stopped paying off. This technique feels unnatural at first because it challenges the belief that self-respect requires immediate response. It doesn't. Self-respect is deciding when engagement is unnecessary. Power is choosing where your energy does not go. When there is no target, there is no hit. An insult only hurts if it finds a target. The second principle forces a hard reset in how you think about honesty. With healthy people, sharing builds closeness. Vulnerability creates trust. Speaking openly brings relief. But with toxic people, information doesn't bond. It arms. What you reveal is not held with care. It's stored, indexed, and repurposed. They don't listen to understand your inner world. They listen to locate pressure points. That's why conversations that feel sincere in the moment come back to hurt you later. You mention you've been stressed, trying to be real, and weeks later that stress is used to discredit you. You admit money has been tight, and suddenly it becomes leverage to rush you, guilt you, or keep you dependent. Nothing you share disappears. It circulates. This is where well-meaning people sabotage themselves. You speak as if transparency will create safety. In a toxic dynamic, transparency creates exposure. Every personal detail sharpens their map of you. They learn what you fear, where you doubt yourself, and what makes you flinch. Then they wait. And when the timing is right, they press exactly there. Calmly, casually, often while smiling. That's why it feels so disorienting. You thought you were connecting. They thought you were supplying. The correction here is not deception. It's restraint. You stop offering real data. You stop narrating your emotional state. You stop giving updates about your struggles, plans, finances, or vulnerabilities. Instead, you answer lightly and vaguely. I'm good. Busy. You know how it is. That sentence is not meaningless. It's defensive architecture. It gives nothing to twist, nothing to weaponize. When they push for more details, you don't bite. You redirect. You keep the conversation shallow without being rude. This often triggers discomfort in them. They'll say you're closed off. They'll accuse you of changing. That reaction tells you everything. They weren't missing closeness. They were missing access. Selective privacy doesn't make you dishonest. It makes you precise. You still share deeply, just not with people who have proven they misuse intimacy. This shift protects your energy and collapses a major source of their power. Over time, they become restless. The conversation feels dull to them. The dynamic loses its grip. That's the point. In the physical world, you wouldn't hand a stranger your house keys just to seem friendly. Your inner life deserves the same respect. Privacy is not secrecy. It's armor. The third principle is the one that feels the most unnatural, because it asks you to release something your ego clings to. the need to be right. Toxic people expect resistance. They provoke so you will argue. They accuse so you will defend yourself. The moment you push back, they have you exactly where they want you, inside a fight they control. This is why logic fails and explanations spiral. You deny one claim, they introduce another. You clarify one point, they twist your tone. The conflict never resolves because resolution was never the goal. Psychological judo breaks this pattern by refusing to meet force with force. Instead of countering the attack, you absorb it and let it fall flat. The key distinction is this: you agree with their perception, not their judgment. You validate what they feel without accepting guilt, blame, or responsibility. Imagine someone says, "You're overreacting." The automatic response is defensive. "I'm not overreacting. You always do this." That response ignites a loop that can last hours. The judo response is calm and brief. "I can see why you'd think that." Then you stop. You don't explain. You don't justify. You don't apologize. You acknowledge their view and remove the fight. That sentence is powerful because it gives them nothing to push against. They prepared for conflict. You remove the arena. This technique works because toxic dynamics rely on polarity. They need you on the opposite side to sustain momentum. Agreement without submission collapses that polarity. The aggression has nowhere to land, so it turns inward. Another example. A manipulative parent says, "You never make time for this family." The old pattern leads to calendars, raised voices, and emotional exhaustion. The judo response sounds like this: "You're right. It probably doesn't feel like enough to you." Full stop, no defense, no promise to change, no emotional unraveling. Often there's an awkward pause. They may repeat themselves. They may escalate. That escalation is not failure. It's evidence that the script broke. You didn't take the bait. This principle protects your energy because it removes your ego from the exchange. You are no longer trying to win the argument or correct the narrative. You are trying to end the interaction intact. Being right is expensive. It costs time, peace, and emotional stability. Ending the fight costs almost nothing. This approach requires discipline. You must tolerate the discomfort of leaving things unresolved in the moment. But that discomfort fades quickly. The exhaustion from endless battles does not. Over time, toxic people learn that provoking you no longer delivers the payoff they want. Conversations shorten. Tension drops. Control shifts back to you. You don't win by being right. You win by ending the fight. The fourth principle shifts power without confrontation. It is intentional absence. Toxic people feed on access. When you are always available, always responsive, always present, you become predictable. Predictability lowers your value in any power dynamic, not because you matter less, but because reaching you costs nothing. Scarcity changes the equation. Scarcity creates weight. When your presence is no longer guaranteed, people feel it immediately. This isn't about playing games or pretending to be busy. It's about reclaiming ownership of your time and attention. Notice what happens the first time you don't reply right away. A delayed response becomes a follow-up message. Then another. Then irritation. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? That reaction exposes the expectation they had of you. Instant access, unquestioned availability. That expectation is the leverage they were using. Start with small shifts. You don't respond the moment your phone lights up. You don't drop your plans every time they want engagement. You don't attend every gathering out of obligation or fear of being judged. And most importantly, you don't explain. Explanations reopen the door to negotiation. They invite debate. Silence closes it. When asked why you weren't available, "I was busy" is enough. You let the sentence stand on its own. No defense, no details, no apology. This creates discomfort, but not for you, for them. Their sense of control depended on your predictability. When that disappears, they feel destabilized. They may accuse you of changing. They may say you've become distant or selfish. That's not feedback. That's withdrawal from a supply that's being cut off. Emotional absence is just as powerful as physical absence. You can be in the same room and still be unreachable. Fewer words, less emotional investment, no urgency to fix the mood. Over time, the dynamic recalibrates. They either adapt their behavior or move on to someone easier to access. Both outcomes work in your favor. Scarcity is not punishment, it's filtration. It reveals who respects your boundaries and who only valued your availability. This principle protects your nervous system. It gives your mind space to breathe. It reminds you that your attention is not neutral currency. It has cost. When you stop offering yourself without limits, you stop being consumed. You become harder to reach, harder to drain, harder to control. Access to you is a privilege, not a right. There are moments when silence, distance, and restraint are no longer enough. Sometimes a toxic person escalates in public. They make a cutting remark wrapped in humor. They disguise an attack as a joke and rely on your politeness to shield them. This is where many people make a costly mistake. They retaliate quietly, sarcasm after the fact, complaints behind closed doors, passive aggression meant to feel soigné. That approach always fails. Toxic people are experts in the dark. They deny intent. They rewrite context. They twist private reactions into proof that you're unstable. Quiet revenge only strengthens their position. When direct pressure is required, the correct move is not anger. It's exposure. You bring them into the light. This is the spotlight. When they say something sharp in front of others, you don't laugh it off. You don't snap back. You pause. You look at them calmly and ask, "Can you explain what you meant by that?" Then you stop talking. That silence does the work for you. The room shifts. The joke loses momentum. They are forced to translate implication into clarity. Most can't. They stumble. They retreat into, "I was just joking," or "You're too sensitive." You don't argue. You keep the light on. "I understand you were joking. I'm just asking what made it funny." Now the burden is on them. They must either admit the cruelty or expose their own incompetence. Either way, the mask slips. This isn't about humiliating them. It's about removing camouflage. Toxic behavior depends on plausible deniability. The spotlight destroys that. Notice what you didn't do. You didn't insult them. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't explain your feelings. You asked a neutral question and allowed reality to speak. That anchors the moment in observable behavior, not emotional debate. It also sends a clear signal to everyone watching. You are not fragile. You are not afraid of discomfort. You are willing to pause the room to protect your boundaries. That reputation spreads quietly. People learn where the line is with you. Toxic individuals feel it immediately. They may label you difficult. Good. Difficult means expensive, hard to exploit, not worth the risk. Use this tool selectively, only when there is an audience and a pattern, not for every minor slight. Precision matters. When applied correctly, the game ends fast. Predators survive in shadows. When toxic people realize they can no longer provoke you directly, they often change strategy. They go after how others see you. This is the smear campaign. It rarely looks aggressive. It comes as concern, confusion, or just sharing something I heard. Small comments planted carefully, doubt introduced quietly. Their goal isn't to destroy you in one move. It's to isolate you slowly by shaping the narrative around you. Your instinct in this moment is to defend yourself, to explain, to clarify, to correct the record before it spreads. That instinct is natural, and it is exactly what makes the smear effective. The more you chase rumors, the more reactive you appear. The more emotional you sound, the more credibility you lose. Toxic people rely on that scramble. They want you running from fire to fire while they stay calm in the background. The real counter is discipline, not speech. You don't fight a smear campaign with arguments. You outlast it with consistency. When someone tells you, "I heard you're difficult," you don't unload your side of the story. You don't list injustices. You respond evenly. That's unfortunate. I've always tried to be professional. Then you move on. No tension, no urgency, no bitterness. Over time, people begin to notice something important. Your behavior doesn't match the story. You show up the same way every day. Steady, capable, grounded. Meanwhile, the person spreading rumors keeps escalating. Their version gets louder. Yours stays quiet. Their tone gets emotional. Yours remains neutral. That contrast does the work for you. Smear campaigns collapse when the initiator can't get the reaction they need to sustain the lie. They burn energy. You don't. Eventually, others start questioning the source, not the target. This takes patience. It doesn't feel satisfying in the moment, but it is effective. You are building a reputation fortress, not with words, but with repeated behavior, reliability, calm, competence. That fortress doesn't need defending. False stories crack against it on their own. Silence here is not weakness, it's confidence. You're signaling that your life doesn't revolve around correcting every distorted version of you. Truth moves slower than gossip, but it lasts longer. Let contrast do the talking. The Machiavellian exit is not loud, emotional, or dramatic. It is quiet, final, and deliberate. You don't explain yourself. You don't ask to be understood. You don't seek closure. Toxic people don't want closure anyway. They want access. They want one last conversation to reframe the story, extract emotion, or pull you back into the dynamic just long enough to feel in control again. Every explanation you offer becomes a new opening. Every goodbye becomes a negotiation. Silence removes all leverage. When you disappear without announcement, you deny them the one thing they crave most, the ability to manage the ending. This is not avoidance, it is containment. You block the number. You stop responding. You remove points of contact without commentary. No final messages written in moments of doubt. No checking to see if they noticed. No returning to clarify your intentions. Turning back is how the loop restarts. Toxic people only need a crack. They will accuse you of being cold. They will say you abandoned them. They may rewrite the story to make themselves the victim. Let them. Their narrative does not require your participation. Closure is a privilege of healthy relationships. In toxic ones, closure is just another stage. The Machiavellian exit protects your future by refusing to sacrifice it for someone else's comfort. At first, the silence will feel heavy. Your mind will search for reasons to explain yourself, to soften the ending, to be fair. That urge is conditioning, not truth. If you stay with the silence, something changes. Your nervous system settles, your thoughts clear. You realize how much energy was spent managing reactions that were never yours to carry. Disappearing is not revenge, it's release. You are choosing freedom without permission. Silence is the only goodbye they cannot control. You didn't become colder. You became more grounded. For a long time, you were taught to confuse harmlessness with goodness. You believed that being agreeable, open, and endlessly accommodating made you virtuous. It didn't. It made you exposed. A harmless person isn't good. They're simply unable to defend themselves. Real virtue requires strength. It requires the ability to hold boundaries, to withdraw when necessary, and to stay silent without collapsing into guilt. What you've learned here is not how to dominate others, it's how to stop being dominated. A formidable person isn't cruel. They are contained. They don't react on command. They don't leak emotion into situations designed to drain them. They choose when to engage and when to disappear. That choice changes everything. When kindness comes from strength, it becomes clean. It's offered freely, not extracted under pressure. It has limits. It has weight. This is why toxic people lose interest when you change. Not because you fought them, but because you stopped feeding them. You didn't harden your heart. You protected it. Behind that protection, your empathy doesn't die. It matures. It becomes intentional instead of automatic. You didn't lose your kindness. You just stopped handing it to people who weaponized it.